Welcome to the Cory Lee Show, where our focus is on building leaders and transforming culture. My name is Cory Lee, and in each episode, I aspire to ignite something on the inside of you that encourages you to grow yourself and to make an impact on the world around you. Welcome to the Cory Lee Show. Well, welcome back to the Cory Lee Show, guys. I have a great episode today. I've got two awesome people that I want you guys to meet. We've got Emma Hatcher. Emma, I know you get the opportunity to talk here in just a little bit and share a background of what you do, and highly talented. But Emma and I actually met in a really odd kind of way. I went to an executive retreat, and one of the guys that I was talking to, this was in California, he had telling me he just wrote a book, and I told him I was thinking about writing one, and he was telling me his process, but the biggest part of his process was he found an amazing editor. And I said, well, you need to hook a brother up, all right? And so he connected me with this lady named Emma. All I had was her first name and an email. We got on the phone call, and she called, and it was a 662 area code, and that's actually, the area code where I live. And I was like, wow, what in the world's going on here? And so we got connected that way, and she's helped me write 4 books and done a great job. And then she connected me with an amazing guy that we're going to get to meet today. His name is Jeremy. And so I just want to say thank you guys for coming on, and welcome to the Cory Lee Show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, Jeremy, you and I have talked a couple of times and do a lot of things in strength and conditioning, human performance. And I think one of the topic that we're talking about today is it's something I'm really passionate about, but I think it's really going to help a lot of people. But before we get into some content, I would love for the listeners to kind of hear, who are these people that we're talking to? And so we'll go ladies first. All right. So Emma, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? Tell us your background, your story.
Sure thing. So as Cory's already touched on, I come from Mississippi, but there was a time in my life I moved out to Colorado, specifically the Colorado Springs area. And with that, I ended up in a role where I was the lead copy editor for a 501c3. And then the pandemic rolled in, and the pandemic created a lot of structural changes for the organization. It was also causing, as we all know, mayhem for the globe. And so I ended up deciding to transition back to Mississippi, and then later on accepted a position in Alabama, where I was also working my editing business on the side. And then a mutual contact actually introduced me to Cory, which is how we actually started that partnership in 2022.
Yeah,
so it's been a while.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe. This is the first time we're actually able to meet in person.
Yeah.
But yeah, so one thing led to another as far as the training with copy editing, leading into more like content editing, which is where you actually work closely with those manuscripts, which now I actually specialize in nonfiction manuscripts.
Very good. And does a fantastic job. I think whenever we first talked, I told you, I'm okay with speaking, but the way I write is I write the way that I speak, and that doesn't translate into the written word. And she does a great job of bringing that out. So I'm glad that you're here. And then Jeremy, super excited to get to meet you for the first time. You and I have talked a couple of times, and I know whenever we have talked, it's like, man, I like that guy. I like just you're full of joy, full of passion, and just there's this hunger about you that I really like. And so tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what you're passionate about.
Yeah, so I'll also say, I met Emma through her editing skills as well. We'll let her talk about our journal we launched this year a little bit. She's the associate editor for there and is phenomenal. But yeah, my name is Jeremy Carter. I am the president of True Performance Realization, right? And we're a human performance business. And what we do is we exist to enable higher integrated, true human performance for a greater purpose. So when you start looking at human performance, right, from a holistic mindset, it's more than fitness, right?
Yeah.
There's so much there. There's cognition, there's skills, there's ability. What we're going to talk today is about followership and leadership, but it's culture. But, I started my journey on the human performance industry, hate to say this, but over 2 decades ago. I was in high school. I drove to Dallas. I went to the Cooper Institute. I got my first certification, and that has just kind of launched the journey and the pursuit of trying to always learn more about human performance. So that's about me.
Yeah, I like it. And so you got the journal going, and Emma's helping you with the journal. You allowed me to write an article in that first one there. And so I really appreciate that. And so I know we've got a couple different topics that we want to talk about, and I think that is really, really powerful. The first one, though, is followership.
Yes.
And so if you guys are good with that, I'd love to just jump in to that. And as we were talking about the content, and I really started thinking about this quote that I've heard before, and I think it comes into this, is like, the quote goes like, civilization is always in danger when those who have never learned to obey are given the right to command. And I think there's something powerful about followership. And so, Jeremy, you want to kick us off, or
Yeah, absolutely. I'm
with
going to
what
let
that
Emma
is?
kind of
Yeah,
introduce us with the definition. We're going to go with the simple definition, and I'm going to talk about just 7 issues to help frame our discussion. But you're absolutely right, right? We talk about the positional leader, what is expected of them, how can they influence? But we have to realize the follower, that positional subordinate, is a leader,
yeah,
and there's a great way to lead. But I'm going to turn over to Emma and let us kind of introduce what followership is, and I'll talk about the conversation for the day.
I like it.
Yeah, so in simplest terms, being a follower means being ambitious with humility within the organization. So someone is coming in and they're providing leadership in 3 different directions. One is leading up, leading down, and also leading laterally, which means we're leading to the side, we're leading our peers. So in simplest terms, that is followership.
Yeah, man, that's really good. And I actually get this question a lot when I do leadership training. Is like, I think people can understand the leading down because there's a lot of content on leading down, but then being underneath leadership, but also being expected to influence other people. That's not always easy. Leading down, leading sideways, and even influencing up. And so I think that's good. And something else, Jeremy, I know you talk about is passive versus active followership. And I was thinking about that, and that is such a powerful thing too, because when you're a follower, it's not just like mindlessly leading whoever it is, that there's an active
Yes.
part of that.
Yeah, exactly. So when you talk about following, that is passive. When you talk about followership, it's active. Like
Yeah.
you have that ownership, you have that purpose, you have that commitment. So yeah, I'll kind of talk about 7 issues to help kind of frame discussion. But that, like you said, Corey, that's the first one. So to the listener out there, when you hear followership, it is not passive. It is active, and it's that ownership in the organization. The second issue to help frame discussion is that a subordinate does not equal a follower, right? A subordinate is determined by that positional hierarchy, right? But a follower has an intrinsic choice, that intrinsic choice to follow that leader and then hopefully to display followership. The third issue, and this is just critical, it's central to the whole conversation, is followership is leadership. So if you are a follower, if you're a leader, if you're reading books on leadership, everything you've learned how to be a positional leader, it still applies to be a positional follower. The fourth takeaway is when you start talking about instilling followership in your organization and trying to increase it, it truly takes a burden off the leader
Mm.
because no longer you don't have to have all the right answers. You don't have to make all the decisions. It's not all on you because you're empowering your positional subordinates, your followers. I know you read about John Maxwell, you study with him, and he wrote a great book, right? The 5 levels of leaderships. So the fifth issue to talk about is there are levels of leaders,
Yeah.
right? Accordingly, there are levels of followers. The sixth issue is there are good leaders and bad leaders, so accordingly, there are good and bad followers, right? A good follower is going to help prevent unethical, immoral, or illegal behavior. Right? A bad follower will overlook it. They'll look the other way. They're going to enable it, right? So good followers will prevent the unethical behavior. And then the last thing is, nobody is a great leader to everybody.
Mm.
And so accordingly, nobody's a great follower to everybody. So to the listeners out there, as you're going through this, recognize to some of your superiors, you might be what we're going to talk about later is a go type follower. But to some of your leaders, you might actually be, what we would say a slow type or slow go subordinate. So yeah, Emma or Corey, any thoughts?
Yeah. I hadn't thought about this. We talk a lot about 5 levels of leadership and levels of leadership, but I never thought about the levels of followership and how I even liked how you framed it there, no go, slow go, and go, of how
Yep.
some are, some are just toxic, some are passive aggressive,
Yes.
and how that can deplete a culture internally. There's this John made this statement one time, and it kind of changed my paradigm, John Maxwell, of in leadership, and he said that decisions should be made at the lowest level possible.
Mm.
And I was like, wow, that is really
Mhm.
interesting. And when you've created a culture like what you're
Yes,
talking about, you can do that, right?
absolutely.
Like when you've created a culture where everyone can be viewed as a leader, but they also understand that they're underneath influence or underneath authority, you can empower people like that, and empowering culture allows that to be possible.
Yeah,
And so,
absolutely.
yeah, that's really good. And so, as we talk about followership, like why, I know this is something you talk about too, but why is it actually needed? Why are we talking about that?
Yeah, so, if you're interested more, you can go to the journal, T-Press, True Performance Realization Applied Journal, and, it is a series we have going on right now. So what we're doing today is from part one. And part one says, hey, what is followership? What is not followership? What is a follower? What is not follower? The second part, and hopefully, Corey, we get invited back to the podcast, is we talk about why you need it. So briefly to the listeners, let's talk about why you need followership in your organization, right? And there's 12 basic reasons. The first four is going to prevent things you do not want in your team, you do not want in your culture, right? And it's going to prevent toxic cultures, it's going to prevent blunders, it's going to prevent dissonance, and it's going to prevent clicks. I briefly want to talk about what a blunder is. When you're in an organization, you're trying to grow, you're trying to transform, you're trying to empower those low level leaders, you're going to have mistakes, and that's okay, right? Mistakes happen. What a blunder is when you keep making that mistake worse. And when you have this culture of followership, you're going to really decrease blunders because you're going to see everybody has this active voice and this active ownership in the organization. Four more reasons you're going to need followership is it's going to facilitate cohesion, resiliency, moral courage, and trust. Briefly, I want to talk about two of those. You know, so much of our headlines are dominated by leaders falling, right? Making unwise decisions, making unethical decisions, and if you have a culture of followership, you have a culture of moral courage. And that follower can go to the leader and say, hey, what you're doing, you're drifting off course, right? You're creeping to area you don't want to go. So that moral courage will help prevent that. And then when it comes to trust, there's nothing in an organization that's going to increase tempo or speed faster than trust. And the last four reasons why you're going to want followership is it's going to facilitate productivity, initiative, transformation, and the actual teams. And when you look at productivity, initiative, and transformation, they're linked, but those are completely different,
Mm,
right? To be a good organization or a great organization, you have to produce. But you can have productivity without replication. I'm sorry, productivity without initiative, and that's called replication, right? Accordingly, you can have a lot of initiative with no follow through, and that's just ideas. So you need both production, you need both initiative. And then in today's society, with just the proliferation of technology, organizations are having to transform. So you
mm,
have followers, you have followership, and it will help that transformation.
yeah. Jeremy, you hit when you were talking about the facilitate moral courage. I am really seeing that right now. Leaders falling and in every sector of society, right? It's
Mhm.
in the world. I'm a lot of times in the church world, really seeing it right now with leaders who are falling. But I'm also seeing it in sports.
Yep.
I don't know if you guys saw the thing with the Michigan head coach, like he got into some trouble, and it's really not just him. That's just a recent example, but having a culture where the leader is open,
Hmm.
but also people who have the courage to go and say, "Hey, what you're doing, that's not right," or "I see you going down that path." Man, that's powerful. I think that's much needed, and I think that's why it's so important as we continue to grow in leadership to have people in our lives, whether it's in a team, especially in a team, but even outside of a team, people who can call us out on our stuff, you know?
Yeah. And when you have a culture of followership, right, it's a two-way street,
Yeah.
right? Because that positional subordinate can go to the leader and say, hey, you're wrong. But that positional leader then has the ability to be vulnerable enough to say, yes, you're right.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. And so, Emma, I would love to hear from you. Like, what is followership? What is that?
That was a great question, Corey. So in summary, just kind of the abbreviated version, but again, as Jeremy mentioned, in our journal, we actually go into this in great detail in our article series. But it includes leading up and being passionate, engaged, and curious. So you're not just showing up to work, you're actually coming and you're bringing your heart with you. And you're working beyond reproach for the mission, not just yourself. You're not just coming in to get a really cool title on a business card. You're actually coming to drive a mission forward. In addition to that, you're keeping everyone informed. This is not a culture where we are creating cliques where some people know what's going on and other people don't. Like, we're not into withholding. We're actually creating a properly inclusive culture where we keep everyone on the team really on the same step so that we're in unison. In addition, we're operating on principles. So this is not something where everyone does what's right in his own eyes. This is something that we have established principles that we are applying to these situations as we are driving the mission forward. In addition, which I mentioned briefly earlier, which is this combination of humility and ambition that actually work together.
Mm.
People are not humble to the point that they are invisible, but they're also not ambitious to the point that they have to be in front and to get the credit. And we're also setting up the team and the boss for success, which is going to be a huge contrast to some types of no-go subordinates that Jeremy will talk on later. And there's also this very essential component of being accountable to all.
Mm. You talked about humble and ambitious and holding that tension. Wow, that is such a good tension because I see a lot of talented, and this is something like false humility was something I struggled with of, you got to be quiet, nobody, other people are better than you and those kind of things. And so it causes you to stay in the shadows or stay in the corner. And so I see a lot of talented people who don't get out there because they're like, I'm not supposed to be seen. But then that opposite end of arrogance and prideful, but holding that dichotomy because you guys and every one of us in this room, you got gifts, talents, and abilities that, man, this world needs those gifts, talents, and those abilities. And when we hide those or we use them just for our own purpose, like nobody wins. And so I know earlier on we talked about followership is there's like an active part, it's not passive. And so I know, Emma, you talked about what followership is. So I'm assuming there's a thought of what followership is not. Huh?
Yeah, I'll actually take that one. And, I'm not sure if you ever read the book, Jim Collins' Good to Great.
Oh, yeah.
It's a phenomenal book. I recommend it to anybody in the business world, athletics, if you're leading somebody good to great. And in the book, Jim, he talks about many organizations become good, right?
Yeah.
Because it's comfortable and it's achievable. Few organizations become great. But he says great organizations, they focus equally on who they are and who they are not, what they will do and what they will not do. So when you
Mhm.
go to our journal, T-Prash, you'll see a lot of times in our articles, we're talking about, hey, what something is and what something's not. So Emma did a great job of talking about what followership is, but let's talk about what's not. It's not being quiet. It's not being timid. It's not being passive. It is not being a yes person, right? Followership is not hoping others fail. So often in our society, you'll see people in an organization where they hope others fail to allow them to climb that ladder, right? And when you truly have a culture of followership, you want everybody to succeed, right? Even if it doesn't necessarily serve your own self ambitions. You know, followership is not blind loyalty. It's not being complicit to unethical acts. And it's not enabling bad behaviors, right? Also, followership is not about taking a fall for a leader, right? Followership is not about working for a promotion, a position, or a pay raise. Emma, and you've already talked about it. Like, ambition's not bad, right? You can be ambitious and you can also be humble. But the moment your ambition starts taking over, it's all about you, not the organization, not the purpose, not the vision, not the leader, not the others. And that ambition becomes more important than anything else, right? You're going to have issues, right? And
Mm.
we're going to talk about that later, but it's going to lead to unethical acts. It's going to lead to just trying to focus on short-term wins over long-term growth. So you can have ambition, but your ambition's second to the organization. Right? It is not about being an echo chamber. And then lastly, it's not about using your proximity to a leader for self-serving benefits. As you climb that ladder within an organization and you get closer to that leader, a good follower, good followership, he's not really a obstacle to the leader, right? Sometimes he's a filter. He keeps, things from the desk that necessarily the leaders need to have. But usually more often than not, he's a bridge connecting others.
Mm. You were talking about the Jim Collins book, Good to Great. I agree. It's a book that really good to read right there. But you said something in there I think is really key, and I just want to say it again. You talked about the good companies that move to great. They focus not on only who they are, but who they're not, and I think that gets lost sometimes as well of like that's kind of like your core values of like here's my goals and my strengths and all those kind of things, but here are the things I'm unwilling to do. I'm unwilling to be this kind of leader. I'm unwilling to be this kind of person. I'm unwilling to engage in these kind of activities. And so, man, that is really good. And my wife, she always talks about is like when something happens funny or whatever.
Yeah.
She's like, "I'm just giving daddy content." Well, you know what, Jeremy? You're just
Mhm.
giving me content because I'm thinking on that, right? Like
Yes.
that really hit, I think, as who you are and who you're not, and just the focus of that. And so I know we're talking about this theme of followership. And so I love how you guys have explained that, but there's also the person involved, and that's the follower. And
Yeah.
so it kind of transition from like the thought of what followership is and make it a little more personal. Like when you think of a follower, who's a follower? What is a follower? And what's that not, I guess?
Mhm.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, so when people hear about follower, one of their first thoughts might be like, okay, like an employee at a company or an organization. But that's actually not necessarily true because an employee is actually an automatic subordinate. A follower is not an automatic as far as someone can become an employee and still not choose to become that follower. So the difference, the dividing line between those two realities is that the employee is by default a subordinate, but a subordinate is not by default a follower because subordination is positional, whereas being a follower is a choice.
hmm, interesting. And so that's when follower is it. What can you go a little more into like what it is? I think that was really good. Of there's actual choice there rather than just well, this is my job, my job, and this is the position I'm in. But yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Sure thing. So a follower is someone who can provide that loyal dissent, and by that we don't. And Jeremy mentioned this earlier that we're not just blindly following leaders, but we actually give feedback. We give feedback that is effective and it's insightful, and that's going to come in the form of insights that can provide those needed challenges when it's timely, guidance, also differing perspectives. So being a follower does not mean being a yes person. And this function is going to require trust, it requires communication, and it requires credibility. That's really ultimately going to need to go both ways. But for the follower to have the platform to be able to speak into the life of a leader, they will certainly have to have earned trust, have those communication skills, and have provided that credibility. In addition to that, your followers are not the people who just show up and point out the problems. They also offer solutions to the problems. So they're actively brainstorming their way through the issues that arise, inevitably in an operation or an organization. So another thing is that the follower is it's the exceptional person who refuses to say, if I was in charge. It's very easy for the words, if I was in charge, to show up in the break room or on the, unofficial outings for the work members. But what that really translates into is someone who's really a disgruntled employee. And and sometimes it's actually a form of gossip because it's taking a reality and then providing this negative side to it. The problem with that is it does not actually provide ownership. So when you're a follower, you're taking ownership of your part, of your contributions. And that's why a follower is the exceptional person who refuses to use that kind of victimization phrase. In addition, the follower is someone who has courage. They have the courage to serve, the courage to challenge, the courage to transform, and if necessary, to leave. And I think you've already mentioned that in the church, sometimes we have some issues when it comes to followership versus leadership. And this is one that I think, unfortunately, we really don't actually empower people. We don't give people permission to leave. A lot of times we spiritualize the abuse or we
Mm.
spiritualize the pressure and even sometimes the form of peer pressure, which is really ironic because we're not called to do that. It's the total opposite. So something I was going to share is as a life example is there was a time that I was working with a specific ministry. And as I worked with this ministry over the months, every month, there was just this management dynamic. I had a supervisor who was unfortunately kind of going through some things in her personal life and was struggling with some personal unwellness. But every month that went by, our relationship just got a little bit worse. And it did not seem to matter what was said or how I responded. Everything was wrong. And over time, I ended up appealing to HR and saying, hey, I'm getting these weird emails when I come to work first thing in the morning. I'm getting, these weird comments during our meetings. Like, I don't know how to resolve this because I'm not sure she wants to resolve this. And eventually, it actually came down to a point where I needed to make a decision. Was I going to continue enabling someone to operate in such a way that was, objectively unchristian in the middle of a ministry setting? Or was I going to have the courage to leave and to also back up to HR everything I had presented to them. So I decided to do the hard thing and to actually leave. And once I did, it became evident that HR had a need to track this person. I ended up being the sixth or seventh person in the course of only 2 years to either demote, transition, as in transfer to another department, or to simply quit the ministry altogether. And it might seem like that was a loss for me initially. It was not. That actually opened new doors for me to walk through where the value I brought to the table could actually be fully applied. In addition to that, everyone who was left at that department was relieved of a manager who was not really walking in the methodology she needed to be walking in. She was not using those approaches that she needed to use to properly guide a team. And I actually got a phone call from a previous coworker weeks down the road where he shared, guess what? This person is no longer our manager. They've actually put her in a completely different position, which needed to happen. It was long overdue. And sometimes being the person with the courage to walk out, you may not get everything you want at the moment, but you will set into motion something that is positive for other people. Plus you release yourself into new opportunities as well.
Wow, that's powerful, and takes, I like really the word you said, courage, and it takes a lot of courage. You also talked about gossip earlier. You guys familiar with Uncle Dave, Dave Ramsey? Dave Ramsey, Uncle Dave?
I did
Yeah.
grow up with Dave Ramsey, and I bought my first car with cash.
Oh, let's go, let's go. I like it. Well, one of the things Uncle Dave Ramsey talks about in culture is, he talks about having a no gossip policy, and he's like,
Mhm.
gossip is a cancer, and, he talks about, like, no tolerance,
Yeah.
0 tolerance to gossip. He also says something I thought was interesting too. You talk about how people say, if I were in charge, or they should do this and they should do that. And thought a lot about this, especially working with companies. And it's so easy to say they should do this or they should do that because it's an opinion, right? Like an opinion, it's easy to have an opinion because there's no responsibility that's attached to the outcome, right? I could say, you should, you know what, Emma, you should do this. You should do that, right? Or Jeremy, you know what you should do? This
Mhm.
is what you should do, right? But I don't have to bear the weight and
Yep.
responsibility that comes with the action, and so I like how you brought that up. That's actually a toxic thing, and so, yeah, I love that, Emma. That's good stuff. Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
Yes, I would like to add to it that followers, they're also people who have passion and they have that initiative and they have, again, that ownership. So they're not the people who are just sitting up and running the clock out at their desk. They're really using those work hours to add to the mission, to add to the organization. They're also catalytic. So employees come in and they will operate at the status quo. They're not looking to change anything. They're not looking to improve anything. They want what their paperwork agreement is. I give you so much time
Mhm.
for so much money, and then I get my weekend, typically. So the difference is that a follower is someone that they are looking to actually better the environment around them as well as to reach that ultimate mission. And followers are also using their trust and their credibility for the benefit of the organization. They're not just in it for themselves. And followers also know what to bring to their boss and what to handle. So this goes into some of that initiative we touched on earlier, that they are invested enough in what's going around them. They actually develop that discernment to know, hey, this is something I take to my supervisor. Hey, this is something that I can handle at this level among my team or with myself. And through that, followers they actually end up serving several different functions. One of those is that they become a bridge. So they actually become a connection point for other people in the organization. But they can also serve as that filter. So, in a way, another word would be gatekeeping. They're not just going to run to the boss with every little thing because they know not every little thing is going to be worth that person's time and attention. There are things that can be handled at a lower level with just as much effectiveness and efficiency, which is in the best interest of the organization or the mission overall. One thing that followers are not is that they're not going to be barriers for the sake of being a barrier. So we've all seen people that do create those barriers for one reason or another. That is not the position of the follower. Because again, ultimately having those barriers, it's very similar to having clicks. It actually impedes the connection, the communication that's needed. And in addition to that, the follower has one more aspect that really is like the icing on top of the cake. And that is that they're not simply going to say, shrug off something, say, that's just not my job. they will actually say, it is within my responsibility, not in the sense that they have to handle everything, but they are responsible to hold everyone accountable. So if they see something that's going unchecked, they will see it as within their responsibility to contribute to finding a solution, even if it's as simple as confronting someone in the right way to hold them accountable.
That's good. I like that. And, early on, Jeremy, you said something really powerful. You talked about the levels of leadership, but there's also levels of followership. And I'd love to hear more about that if
All right.
you could share something on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, to the listener out there, if you don't know, we are in North Mississippi. And so I drove here from Florida, going through North Alabama. It's absolutely beautiful. So, we're going to kind of use the countryside as an example here. So, if you've ever been in the country, or if you've ever been to a national park, or if you've ever done something like land navigation, you're going to be familiar with terrain, right? There is some terrain you absolutely want to avoid, right? It's the marsh, it's the river. You do not want to go through that terrain, right? We call that no go terrain.
Mm.
So, accordingly, you're going to have subordinates in your organization who are no go subordinates, and you just need to get rid of them. And we're going to talk more in detail about that here in a second. But using the land navigation analogy, there is terrain that you can go through, right? It's soft. There might be brush in there. There might be thorns. And yes, when you walk through this terrain, you can go from point A to point B. It's not efficient. It's not effective, and you're burning a lot of calories, right? We call that slow go terrain. So we call that the slow go subordinate, right? When you have a no go subordinate, slow go subordinate, they are that. They are subordinates, right? They're the positionally lower than you person. Then the last type is also with terrain. It's go terrain, right?
Mm.
It's flat, it's hard, and you can get to where you want to go very quickly, very efficiently. So we call that the go type follower. So our broad categories are no go, slow go, and go.
Mm.
And to the listener out there, as we start diving more into these type of subordinates or followers, you may not exactly agree with the category or the labels, but you're going to see some universal truths there, right? There are people who we don't want an organization because they're going to disrupt it, destroy it, deceive it. There are people who we shouldn't have an organization because they really don't help. And then there is the people who we want to empower. And the people we want to empower are the go followers.
Yeah. I'm curious. This is a side note here, Jeremy. Like, man, this is so good. Like, how did you like? Where did all this come from?
Yes. Honestly, when it comes to leadership, there is this, you learn more from failures. You're going to learn more from bad experiences. And just, over, 20 years being in the human performance industry, working with multiple teams and doing various things, like you just come across these people who do not want to follow, who do not want to support. And, John Maxwell here has his books, the levels of leadership, right? Right. And he says the lowest is positional.
Yeah.
I've been in organizations where there's even lower. There's a level 0 where they don't even care about what your position is. They're not going to respect you. And then in certain organizations, like, well, I mean, what can you do? And you're
Mm.
like, well, they're no go. Get rid of them.
Mm.
And they're like, no, no, no. This is a leadership challenge for you. You need to make them better. And so this is just, years of seeing good leadership, but also experiencing bad leadership. So that's how we kind of came up with the no go, the slow go, and the go. And just to your listener out there, is like, yeah, sometimes those bad experiences in life are the best teachers if you're willing to learn from them.
Yeah. Well, what do you do with like? I know we've got some information on that, and people can go to your journal to find out
Yeah.
more. But like from an aerial view, what do you do with some of these people? Like, is there hope for them? Like, what do you do?
Yeah, so I think what we'll do first is let's talk about the no-go type
Yeah.
subordinates, because I'm actually, and Em and I are actually going to turn this over to you, because in our first issue of T-Prash, launched this year in January, we did a Q&A with you. And we asked you the question,
Yeah.
right? Hey, you have a follower, you have a subordinate, they don't want to listen, they don't want, what would you do? And it's a great answer. But before we get there, let's just talk about the three types of no-go subordinates, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, the no-go are the subordinates you do not want in your organization, right? And the worst of that is we call them the saboteur,
Hmm.
right? They are the most destructive, the most dangerous, the most deceptive. Their actions are hidden, but they are intentionally and covertly trying to disrupt the efforts of the leader, of the organization, of their peers, of their subordinates. And what's really important to know about the saboteur is their competence is a liability, right? Usually you want a very competent subordinate. You want a competent follower. But when you have somebody who is sabotaging the efforts, the more competent they are, the more effective they're going to be. And they're going to isolate, they're going to destroy, they're going to disrupt. So you have to get rid of this person immediately,
Mhm.
right? And I don't think there's any salvaging because they know what they're doing. And with their competency, they're not trying to lead up, they're not trying to improve, they're trying to destroy. So for me, we'll ask you that question too. I think you just get rid of them. The next type of
Can I ask you
yeah,
something
please.
real quick? I'm just kinda curious on that. Do you feel like that individual who's doing that, do you feel like they're always easily seen? Or is it sometimes like I guess the reason I'm asking this is sometimes that, you recognize in your organization or whatever you're doing is like, something is not working here, but you can't put your finger on it. Do
Mhm.
you feel like, sometimes you have to dig a little bit or sometimes they
Absolutely.
easily see?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. When it comes to a leader, you can't overlook problems,
Yeah.
right? And there are signs and symptoms of dysfunction. In fact, we hopefully will be able to do another podcast with you soon on culture, and we're going to talk about the signs and symptoms of toxic cultures. But this competent person who is trying to sabotage, they have some form of influence.
Yeah.
Maybe it's their resume, maybe it's their experience, right? And leadership is about influence. But if you have that influence, you can use it for bad. So what I've seen most with the saboteur is they're going to isolate and sex. They're going to spread their gossip. They're going to spread their lies. They're going to destroy. And this slowly over time, they're eroding away the trust of the organization. And what they're
Mhm.
doing is they're collaborating this low power, this weird form of currency to themselves so that they have more negative influence, which is, again,
Mm.
you just have to get rid of them.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And actually, as you were talking there, it reminded me the other day I was reading my Bible and I got to the story of Absalom. And so Absalom actually sat at the gate where people would come through, and he would ask the person, "Hey, what's your name?"
Hmm.
And they would tell him his name. Is that, you know what? Only if there was somebody who would listen to your story, if there was
Hmm.
only somebody to listen to your problem,
Hmm.
and that's what he did. It says he stole the hearts away
Hmm.
of the people, and I was like, that just hit me when you're talking
Yeah.
about that and I totally agree, like, you gotta do the thing, you gotta get rid of them. So
Yeah.
so I cut you off, I know,
No, no,
but I
no.
was
And I
just curious.
appreciate it. It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
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 So after the saboteur, the next worst type of no-go subordinate is the mutineer, right? What's different between the saboteur and the mutineer is out in the open, right? Their actions are in the open. And can you counsel this individual? Sure. Can you try to mentor them? Yes. But really, I think you have to let them go because they're using their gifts, their competency, their experience to cause a mutiny, right?
Mhm.
To make the leader lose power, to make them lose influence. And you can't be a great organization with this type of individual, right? I believe in the Q&A you wrote, right? You can't be a level 10 organization with level 5 individuals.
Mm.
So there are some people who you don't want on your team, and the mutineer is one of them.
Yeah, and that's good.
Yeah. And, there's a few saboteurs in the organization. I've met them, and there's a few mutineers. The next type, and this is the final type of no-go subordinate, is the opponent. And to the listener out there, like, this is probably going to reign more true. And you're like, oh, yes, I know this individual. And hopefully you not are this individual, right? But the opponent, he is going to oppose, resist, rebel, regardless of the situation. If the boss is going to come out and say, hey, we should go left, that individual's gonna be like, "We're gonna go right." But if the boss came out and said, "Hey, we're gonna go right," that individual would have said, "Hey, we should have gone left." Like, regardless of the situation, they're going to resist and rebel. They lack humility, they lack self-awareness, and they're just completely self-centered. When you work with this individual, they are exhaustive and counterproductive, right? They're not adding to the team. They will believe they're the smartest person in the room.
Mm.
Do you necessarily need to remove this person? Maybe, right? But not necessarily in the sense of they may have good ideas. They don't know that the way they're presenting them is off-putting. So you can just say, "Hey, the way you're doing it right now, it's gonna lead somewhere, and you don't want that, but you have good ideas, potentially. The way you message is important." But if
Mhm.
they're unwilling to change, you have to get rid of them because, again, you can't have unity in a team. You can't be that level 10 organization if people are just actively opposing.
Yeah.
And then something I was going to mention was, Corey, in the Q&A you did with us in issue 1 of T-Praj, you actually have 4 steps where you evaluate and you're actually presenting to the readership. How do you discern between people that at first glance, it just looks like it's absolutely not going to work out, but you're actually prescribing, maybe there is a way to salvage? Do you wanna
Yeah.
touch on that? Because I
Yeah,
feel
yeah.
like those 4 steps are so, cohesive with just this part of the idea of the
Yeah.
no-go population.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's always important as a leader to look in the mirror first, right? I want to see All right, if there's a problem, I need to look at me first instead of always pointing the finger. And so I want to be self aware. And so the first thing I want to do is there's something I'm doing. And then as my team, Jeremy, you mentioned the 5 levels of leadership. Well, the definition of leadership is influence. And so if we think about levels of influence, my first question is, all right, do I have influence with this person? And I love how you've talked about the no-go, the saboteur, the mutineer, and the opponent, and those kind of things. And like, so this whatever's causing this issue, maybe this individual, first, do I have influence with them? I mean, do I have a relationship with them? Or are we good? Are we good? If we're not, that is my first step. I really need to start to gain influence with that individual. At some point, especially if they're talented, right? Like talent is hard to come by. Talented people, they ain't just sitting at the house. People are looking for talent. And so if they're a talented individual, can I bring them over to join the team and do, get on board? And so I want to influence with that. I need to gain influence. Then I've also found that people fail in their jobs because of one of 4 things. Number one, we don't tell them what excellence looks like. We don't let them know, like, hey, this is the standard. And then we don't give them feedback, right? Sometimes what happens, I was like this early on. I would say, hey, I just need you to do that job, right? You just do that, right? But I don't tell them what the standard is. And then it comes time for their performance review at the end of the year. And, they're marked all average or below average, but I've never given them any feedback up until that point. And so they think they're doing good. And so we don't let them know what excellence looks like. And the other one is we don't train them up. We don't properly equip them and let them know, help them to get to where they're going. The other one is attitude. I don't know if I mentioned this one in there, but I found this very important. Attitude doesn't necessarily mean bad attitude. It may just mean they're not in alignment with where we're going. I found this out in our PT clinic. We were in town with 1,100 people, Jeremy. Big city, man.
Big city.
And we were growing and we needed a physical therapist. We had this young lady come in. I shared the vision with her about how we're making an impact in our community. We're literally changing the healthcare of the community. Yeah. We've got gyms and how we're working with high school athletes to win a state championship. And she got to be a part of what we're doing. Yep. And she told me, it's like, that's not what I want to do. Yeah. And I went home to my wife and I said, now how in the world can you claim to be a physical therapist and not want to be a part of this, right? But my wife said something really important. She said, not everybody wants to be a part of your vision.
Yes.
And that's what I mean by attitude. It didn't make her good or bad. It didn't make me good or bad, but she was very clear on what she was looking for. And so maybe the attitude piece isn't, they're just not in alignment with where we're going and then ability. The hardest thing there to me is you've got someone who's nice and kind. People love them. They're alignment with the vision, but they just ain't got the ability. It's the hardest thing. And I think John says it. You can't have a level 10 size team with level 5 size talent. And I think the example he uses is if we're doing track and field and we need a 7-foot high jumper. 7 1-foot track guys ain't gonna get the job done. We need a 7-foot jumper. And so I think building a team, you can't have a level 10 size team with level 5 size talent. And so I think as you look at some of those things, if you've done all of that, sometimes you just got to make the decision and kind of move on.
So I don't know if you know this, Cory, but after you did that article with us, that Q&A in T-Prash, I have somebody I work adjacent to. And they came to me and they had a problem with one of their employees and they're like this, they vented to me like, this is what I'm going to do. And they wanted like justification. Like I was like, yeah, bring the hammer down. I was like, hey, can I show you this? I was like, hey, read this. And they're like, Jeremy, it's made my life harder. It's like, I don't have influence with this person. It's like, yes, I need, and so, but that kind of saved their relationship. And I just showed him like, hey, like it starts with you. Have you made this clear? And he's like, I came for you for justification. I'm like, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, it really is hard. And actually I was talking to a guy the other day. He's in construction world. I know him, you say your dad was, and he's having this issue with a subcontractor and they've got to get this thing done on a time crunch. But this guy is sabotaging and he asked me what to do. And the first step we talked about is like, you got to cultivate a relationship somehow, start there. Because one, you can't fire him because he's not on your team.
Yeah.
And so start with influence. You got to start there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. So I think, so we talked about no-go.
Yes.
And I even liked how you talked about the path. There are some there are no-goes,
Mm.
and then there's some slow goes,
Yes,
right? I
slow
like to
go.
run.
Yes,
And so
yes,
on the trails, there are sometimes some slow go paths. So
yes.
talk to me a little bit about some slow go
So,
folks.
again, with the slow go, can you get to where you want?
Yeah.
Yes. But using your running example, you're burning more calories than you need,
Yeah.
right? For fitness, awesome. Right. For organizational change, that's not what's needed. So we have three types of slow go subordinates, right? The first one is a dependent, and that's who they are, right? They are going to depend on the boss for their tasking, their directive, the intent, right? They have very low initiative, no ownership, and they are very reactive to the situation. They could see a problem occurring, they can see it on the horizon, but they're not going to solve anything about it until it's a problem and then they don't have to react to it. Right. For the leader, the dependent, they're going to perform to the lowest level allowed. Right. So accordingly, like these individuals drain time. Your goal should be to try to get them to a go follower. However, man, again, I think if unable, I love, your suggestions for working with those individuals, you should consider termination, right? Because if they depend on you for everything, you're not what you need to do as a leader. You need to be looking at the vision. You need to be looking out at, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, not day-to-day operations. So they just drain it.
Mm.
Following the dependent, the next type of slow go subordinate is the employee, right? And that is what they are. And what an employee has is numerous clocks going at the same time. How many hours left in the day? How many hours left in the work week? How many days in my next vacation? Right. An employee will do adequate work to the level specified during contracted hours. And Emma's already touched on this, but they're not going to work after hours. They're not going to do discretionary effort. So they are just that. They are not going to drive the vision forward unless you somehow compensate them more, and they're not going to work after hours. And the last thing to talk about the employee is, don't be surprised to see them riding on others' efforts. If you
Mm.
assign a group task to people, the employee is going to try to get by with doing the bare minimum. And then the last type of slow go subordinate is the opportunist. Right. Now, this is the most productive of all these slow go type subordinates. They have initiative, they have drive, they have follow through. However, their ambition is for themselves, right?
Mm.
Their ambition, their drive can make the organization better, but it does come with risk. One risk is unethical acts. They are more likely to do unethical acts so that way they can climb the organizational ladder. All their acts will be self-serving. So it's not for the vision, it's not for their peers, it's not for their followers or subordinates, it's not for the leader. They're going to emphasize short-term wins over long-term results. They're going to avoid facts that should be confronted. So often there's things, there's signs, there's symptoms. You want to confront that, but it's uncomfortable. But they're going to look the other way because they're going to make themselves look better. And oftentimes they'll jump ship right before it goes down. And then lastly, it's going to create a culture of sycophants. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emma.
Yeah. So an example of this, when we go over something like the opportunist, it might actually sound a bit, people might be wondering like, okay, well, who have I ever met that's an opportunist? It sounds like they're really motivated. And this doesn't sound, it sounds so contrasted to someone who's just the employee. And one sector that I would say we do see a lot of this in is actually the political sector. So when you're in politics, you're really on a countdown clock that you have only so many years to make such a difference. But in that time, you also have a space for the next generation to come in. And it's not uncommon for people to show up and put the hard work in, but not because they really want to help you make certain changes, but because they actually have a vision for themselves to have power, influence, prestige, title, all those things that we would associate as benefits of political leadership, to have that presence, especially in the public sense. So that would be a prime example of where we can find people who are opportunists, but it's also going to be located in other sectors as well.
Mm. That's good. I was just sitting here thinking about other examples I've seen in the business world of people jumping on kind of the coattails or the influence of others, but they have a vision for themselves. Yeah, that's really good and something to be mindful of. And I'm just thinking about, as you listen, maybe maybe check yourself, right? Like, check myself, check yourself. Am I any of these, right? Like, being self-aware, and if you feel like, maybe I am a slow goer, or maybe I'm a
Mhm.
no-go, or maybe I'm an opportunist, or maybe as we jump into the go here in just a bit, maybe that's who I am. Really, we don't play the shame game or the blame game, right? None of that kind of stuff. But I do want to be aware. Maybe I am. Once I become aware, maybe I am being dependent. Then I can
Yep.
actually do something about it. And I think so once I do something about it, what's the go? Like, what's that next
That
level?
go terrain, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
you're gonna go from point A to point B very quickly, you're gonna be there efficiently, right? So the first level of the go type follower, again, the no-go and slow go are subordinates. Once you reach go, you're now a follower. There's an intrinsic choice. That first level is the apprentice, right? And this is somebody willingly following you because they wanna learn from your skills, your knowledge, and your experience. Not necessarily you as a leader, right? The simplest way to say what apprentice is they wanna learn how to do your job, not how to become you, right? And if you have an apprentice, right, if you want that relationship to deepen, you should get into the next level of follower, which is the mentee. Now, the big difference between the apprentice and the mentee is that the mentee does want to learn from the leader, right? The apprentice wants to learn, hey, what is the science of the job? The mentee wants to learn what is the art of the job. They're going to want to learn from you on how you make decisions, on how you are as a person, whether you're a father, a mother, a brother, a sister. They are going to try to seek out your experience, your guidance, and your wisdom and try to become more like you, right? And that's a huge responsibility for the leader, right? Because as they go from an apprentice to a mentee, what you're going to see is their willingness to do bad, it's going to increase, right? And you might think, oh, their willingness to do bad, like unethical acts, will increase. Not necessarily. Their willingness to put their family second will increase. To put their fitness, maybe their faith second, is going to increase. They are more likely to do unrecognized works for the leader. So as a leader, you need to approach this with caution because you can obviously burn this relationship. We talked about you talked about how you can become with through self-awareness, right? Hey, maybe I'm a dependent. How do I become an apprentice? How do I become a mentee? If you're the leader, just recognize you can influence that, but it's so much easier to cause them to descend the ladder than ascend the ladder.
Mm,
So if you have somebody and they're working for you, and maybe they're doing a lot of work for, not being recognized. If you abuse this relationship, you're going to create them to be a slow go, maybe a no-go type of subordinate. And then the second thing that I want to talk about the mentee relationship is this relationship deepens, right? Unique to this relationship is that to be a mentor and mentee is a two-way street. Both have to want it, both have to desire it. Now, this can be skewed, but the mentee has to want to be with the mentor, and the mentor wants to be with the mentee.
mhm.
And with that, I'm gonna turn over to Emma.
Right. So not everyone who's going to be in leadership is necessarily going to be deserving of a mentee because they're not necessarily ready for that mentorship role. So they might be more suited to someone coming in as that apprentice because they can learn how to do their job, but they're not necessarily taking on that personal characteristic or that mindset that that leader may hold at this time. And something that we do note is that on top of just making sure that if you are going to become a mentee, you do want to have a mentor who deserves to that influential space in your life because this is going to be the rest of your life that they're influencing. On top of that, if you flip the script and you have a mentee and you're the mentor, you have responsibilities to live up to in that situation. In addition, we do see that two-way investment. So a great example of this would be, for example, in academia, when we see those PhD relationships. So you have someone who they hold their PhD, and ideally they are the expert in a subject matter that now a PhD student is coming in to study and prepare to pursue for the rest of their career. So what's happening simultaneously is that you have the PhD student coming in and working with the PhD, producing literature that actually advances the PhD's career as well. And it's also providing that PhD with personal mentorship experience that they get to carry forward, and that makes them better and better and better throughout the course of their career. But the mentor who is the PhD leading that student through this learning process, those 3 years or more in some cases, they are going ahead of that person and they are opening doors. They're creating really poignant connections. They're putting out communications on behalf of this person. So essentially, they're paving the way for the rest of this person's career. or at least for that initial trajectory to take off upon graduation. So this is that two-way street, and it really should be a two-way street. Unfortunately, sometimes we do hear about it being skewed. We don't want it to be skewed. It does need to be balanced. So it should be two-way, but two-way in a healthy way.
Yeah. I was just sitting here thinking, getting the opportunity to mentor other people, the two-way street part is the result, the outcome, and seeing that individual step into who they've been called to be, seeing them do amazing work, seeing them do great things, and I like to coach and mentor and get the opportunity to do that, and one of the things I require is if I'm gonna mentor you, you mentor somebody else, and in those conversations, we talk, "Hey, how's it going?" And, they always light up when the individual that they're coming alongside of is doing great things, right? Like, when they're stepping in and being bold and courageous, like, to me, that is the return, right? When you mentor someone and there's not any results, that's frustration. To me, it's not a financial return or anything like that. The return is seeing the results and seeing them
Yeah,
develop and
absolutely.
grow, and so I love what you said right there. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So are there any other, like,
Yep,
I
there's
like
2
to
more
prove this into
levels of
mentee.
go, right?
Yeah.
The third is the activist, right? They greatly support the mission, they greatly support the organization, they greatly support the leader, right? They have significant trust and respect for that collective purpose and for that vision and that leader. Now, with the activists, they're gonna put a great amount of discretionary effort into their job, but they're not necessarily gonna seek credit. So again, to the leader, if you had this activist, somebody who's a believer, they want the mission, the vision to be achieved. They want you to succeed, right? You have to make sure they're taking care of themselves and that you're taking care of them.
Mm,
It is similar to the mentee-mentor relationship because this relationship can be skewed, right? The positional subordinate can be more invested in the positional leader and then vice versa. But in the final stage of the go follower, it's not, right? And this should be our goal for everybody, right? It's called the partner, right? This is the final stage of the follower, and compared to the mentee or the activist type followers, this relationship is balanced, it's harmonized, it's symbiotic, right? Both parties want the other one to truly succeed, even if that doesn't mean they're in the organization anymore, right? Their relationship is interdependent, it's integrated, and it's very meaningful. You know, what's very powerful with the partner is each party will hold the other accountable if good followership is applied. This individual can, positional subordinate can go to the positional leader and say, "Hey, you're missing the mark. You're not doing this. You're creeping." And through that relationship, that humility, right? It's like, "Yes, you're right. I can do better." Also unique to this type of go follower is the relationship is very fluid, and it means it shifts on the moment. And I'm sure you've seen this before where that positional number 2 or positional number 3, right? Some things based on their experience or their, their gifts, they're better than the leader and they take the lead on it. And that leader just absolutely follows them. Or what you'll see is if the boss is not there, right? That positional follower, the partner, whatever they say on behalf of the boss, it's valid, it's accurate. So the boss doesn't have to be there for it to get done because that partner and that relationship is so meaningful, they can speak on their behalf.
mm. You know, there are 2 words that as I'm listening to you describe kind of a healthy version of followership, there's 2 words or keep 2 thoughts, I guess. The first thought is the mentor-mentee relationship. There's a spirit in which each person wants to see the other person do well,
Mhm.
right? Like that's the intent. I want to see you do well both ways. And then the word interdependent, right?
Mhm.
Like I think sometimes people can get in trouble, mentor and mentee, by being dependent
Mhm.
upon the others. And I think as you've kind of gone through some of this, I think those are two thoughts that have kind of really stood out to me: is spirit of wishing them to do well each other, and then interdependence. Like
Yeah.
there's a two-way street right there. I love that. And so, Emma, I'd love to hear if you got any other thoughts on, like, risk or anything.
Yeah, so this sort of adds on to the why does this whole topic really matter. So there are some risks that come with followership, and it's going to be the outcomes of these potential risks that are going to be weighty, for people and for organizations. So as someone moves up that ladder, going from no go to slow go to go category, and then within the go category, as they move from what is the lower to more of what we consider perhaps the more ideal version of being a follower, all the way to being a partner, there's an increase in the magnitude of the potential that that person carries to be used as a force of good or a force that is oppositional for the organization. So this outcome can come out in either a good or a bad direction. So if you are an activist for a moral leader and you're displaying that good followership, what's going to happen is ultimately you're positively impacting the team, the community, what's around you. However, if you're also an activist for that immoral leader, and we've seen this, we've seen, you mentioned earlier some of the scandals that
Yeah.
have been out there. Those were people that they meant well, but they were so committed to a cause, their followership actually led to poor outcomes. It's
Mm.
not that they didn't bring their best to the table, but their best as they moved up that ladder and became the activist, became the partner. The magnitude of the direction went the wrong way.
Yeah.
And so that's something where it's good to evaluate not just, where are we on the ladder, but also, when we apply that ladder and as we climb that ladder, what direction do our contributions go in?
Yeah. High risk, high reward.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
When you said that, it reminded me of a conversation I was having with a good friend of mine. This is several years ago. He had a moral failure, and he was a leader in a certain organization. And him and I have had deep conversations about, his restoration, all that kind of stuff. But he had said, in that season, I had this person who said, I will serve you any way you need to. They were so committed to the vision, so committed to what we're doing. They're saying, I was so, I'll do anything you need to do. And it is harmless in the moment. And he received it harmless. But, never really intended for where it
Mhm.
to go, and so
Yeah.
I think, as another thing as I'm listening to you guys is self-awareness,
Mhm.
being aware, and
Yeah.
so powerful. I love this content, I love it, I think it's needed there, and so, Jeremy, if you could put a bow on our conversation of followership, what are some last thoughts you would have?
Yeah, I'd say just 3 final thoughts. 1, right, depending on the moment, you might be a slow go subordinate to a superior and a go type follower to a
Mm,
different superior. Maybe to your immediate boss, you're that employee. You got those clocks counting down. You're just there to get your paycheck. But to your boss's boss, maybe you kind of have this mentor-mentee relationship where you do want to seek from them. So it's not just you're one type of follower, you're one type of subordinate, which brings us to our second point. You can climb that ladder. You
yeah,
can easily go from, up and down that ladder into the leader. Your goal is to try to have your subordinates, your followers climb the ladder, go from the no go to slow go to the go. And then the final thought is to the leader, it is so much easier to have your subordinate or your follower descend the ladder than it is to increase a ladder. It is so hard to take a slow go type subordinate and make them an activist or a partner. But it is very easy to take a partner and then make them a slow go or no go type subordinate. But that's all I have, Corey.
Mhm.
And just
yeah.
Emma and I are truly appreciative of this opportunity to do the podcast with you. So just absolutely thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I think, yeah, what you guys have shared has added a ton of value. And I'm just curious, like, if someone's listening, they want to find out more, like, how do I find out more? How do I read more? Like, how do people get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, so if you Google true performance realization, that will take you to the business. Now, I'm the president of that, and then Emma is, the chief learning officer. And then if you look on true performance realization, you click on journal, and that is TPRAS, True Performance Realization Applied Journal. I'm going to turn over to Emma here in a second. She can talk about it. But yeah, that is a journal we launched this year, January this year. You were in our first issue. And the reason we did that is, we have 7 values. And one of those values is we're a learning organization. And we truly believe that if you're a learning organization, you're not just ingesting knowledge, you're creating and disseminating it. So
Hmm.
that's why January of this year, we launched Cheap Press. So, Emma?
Mhm. Yeah, so True Performance Realization Applied Journal, as Jeremy mentioned, we're a tier 1 learning organization. So the journal is our applied way of pursuing knowledge and inviting people to share that knowledge and disseminate back to the greater community. So we seek to put out information that's original, relevant, accessible, and it's also going to be, things that people can really apply. It's not just nice thoughts or great catchy sayings. This
Mhm.
is stuff that people have actually lived. And we're pulling from different sectors of human
Yep.
performance and putting that back out for people to benefit from as a whole.
Yeah, that's so good. And so what I'll do is I'll have that in the show notes. I'll have that link. I highly recommend you guys going and taking a look at that. And I even love how you mentioned it, performance, human performance in different sectors. I'm a fitness guy, and I think most of the time when we hear that word human performance, we think fitness,
Mhm.
but it's much more than that. It's your
Absolutely.
mind, your body, your soul, your spirit, and those kind of things. And so first business we opened, well, second business, it was called Human Performance Center, by the way.
Mhm.
So just
Okay.
letting you know that.
Yeah.
And there's that connection. So, man, I've really enjoyed you guys coming in. I know you've added a ton of value to our listeners. And so, Emma and Jeremy, just wanted to say, appreciate you guys for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, hey guys, thank you for taking a listen. I know it added value to you. And if there was something that stood out to you, you can comment and I can share that with Jeremy and Emma. Make sure you go and check out their website and the journal, and make sure you like and subscribe so you can stay up to date with any of the latest episodes of The Cory Lee Show. Hope you guys have a great day and God bless.
3, 2, 1. Okay.
Thanks for joining me today. I hope I have added value to you. And if you have found value in this episode, let me know. Drop a comment and make sure you share with a friend or family member. See you next episode.